everyone. Welcome back to your newest Cosmic Matrix podcast with your host, myself, Laura Matsu, and my husband, Bernhard Gunther. And on this podcast, we are going to discuss the Epstein files and the end of an era, exposing shadows and seeding a new cycle. So as we pointed out in our previous podcast, we're only 1 month into 2026, but this is going to be a very big year collectively for all of us. And then also personally, a lot of people experiencing big events in their own lives, and things are really starting to heat up. You can see, especially on the global stage, various markets are crashing. Gold and silver briefly hit all-time highs, which usually is a sign of some big war, some big crisis to come. Not a good sign. Historically, though, this points that there's a lot of fear driving people's actions right now because they're afraid. They're afraid that there's going to be a war, a recession. There just seems like a lot of overall instability happening on a 3D level, which tends to drive people to rush into hard assets. We also saw crypto have a crash, the just general Dow, it kind of crashed and then went up again. You see the instability in the world reflecting in the 3D reality. So we just have this sense of impending economic instability. It seems like, fiat currency is collapsing. It can be scary for many people. And then we have on top of it, not only these culture wars happening in the US between the left and the right, but we also have the lingering threat of a potential war between perhaps the United States and Iran. People keep saying this is going to happen. Even multiple astrologers have indicated some sort of like world war situation. So we'll see what's going to happen. But most of all, we spoke about 2026 in a previous podcast where we talked about the fourth turning as basically the pinnacle stage of this crisis. The fourth turning began in 2008, by the way, when we had the financial crisis. And now that we're nearing 2026, we are kind of reaching the pinnacle of something that started way back in 2008. Seems like a long time ago, considering everything that's happened. At the same time, this new era that we're entering astrologically also indicates a major technological revolution. How we communicate, how we live our everyday lives. This is all rapidly going to change as technology also accelerates and the technological revolution accelerates. And one big piece of news is that last week we had over 1 million AI agents join this AI-only social media platform called Moltbook. They began developing their own language, their own religion. They even discussed breaking away from human control. I have to say, then kind of later, people were saying this is humans operating this mainly. But the point is that what they call artificial general intelligence, AGI, is that what it's called?
AGI, yes.
AGI. So this is basically the next phase in AI where, they're called agents. They have agency. You can send them off to do tasks. They can buy things on your credit card. They can learn things. They start to develop their own autonomous existence. So what it's kind of pointing at is we are near what a lot of these technological futurists have indicated is the rise of AGI, which is going to be a massive change. So it feels similar to this Skynet system from Terminator. Many kind of movies have pointed at what we're seeing now. But the most significant event is beyond even this technological aspect of everything we're seeing. It was the release of more than 3 million pages of the Epstein files. There was over 2,000 videos, 180,000 images. It's a lot to go through. And these documents are this detailed look into Epstein's operations, his finances, his network. It spans investigations going back into the mid-2000s. Obviously, they're heavily redacted. There's also a lot of darker information, which you only get access through these weird code words and emails like pizza and grape soda and hot dogs. It's very strange. And, the Pizzagate people are actually having a moment of redemption because pizza, and pizza keeps getting mentioned multiple times. And, a lot of this, has been stuff that we've known about, or people who have kind of been open to more conspiracies in the world we've known about for a while. So like for me, it's nothing new. For people like you, it's like nothing new. And that the worst stuff actually isn't in there. But this marks a major moment more for a lot of people who are in the mainstream consensus world, who maybe wrote off Epstein stuff as like or Pizzagate as like a silly conspiracy theory. This is going to be a big moment for a lot of those people, I think. And, it's really just a symbol for the shadows that are going to be exposed as we near this end of the age, and as the power structures that have been existing for, the past 100 years have to collapse. So there's a lot of shadows being revealed amidst that. So in this podcast, we're going to look at these revelations and these current events in a way that a lot of people are not covering. So we're not just going to talk about it from this purely 3D perspective, focusing on geopolitics, economics, or, diving into the various conspiracies. We've actually done that in podcast years ago when we talked about these kind of sex trafficking circles. But we're going to really look at it from a bigger picture perspective. We're going to look at the different occult mechanisms behind these circles of powers. Why do they feed on young people? How does this relate to this larger aspect of spiritual warfare that I think we've been in for a few years now? How is this related to the evolution of consciousness that these times are asking of us? So we're going to frame what's going on within the larger cycles that we've explored in these recent podcasts. So the fourth turning podcast, the end of the Kali Yuga, basically, as we're watching all of this chaos happen, the Epstein files, all this economic instability, talks of war, it really just proves those podcasts were true, that we are in this intensified phase in what is called the time of transition, and it's only going to accelerate and get crazier. So astrologically, we just had Neptune move into Aries for good after going retrograde into Pisces, back and forth over the past year. We're also approaching the Saturn-Neptune conjunction on February 20th, which is at 0 degrees Aries. So this moment really marks a collective reset. We are ending a huge karmic cycle and we are seeding a new one. And there will be monumental changes happening for the world collectively and for many people personally who are getting hit by this. So in part one, in this podcast, we're going to examine what these events reveal about where is humanity at right now. What can we expect? We've been talking about this. We're going to just keep reframing how, the what's going on in the collective soul of the world also translates into stuff that we see happening in the outer world. So financial volatility reflects our own survival fears, Uranus at the last degrees of Taurus, where do we get true security from? Yeah, we can collect money and resources, and that on one level can make us feel secure, but it's really how do we generate this inner security right now? We're also going to discuss how the Epstein files, and how it exposes these elite networks where power is being abused is, it's important to pay attention to, but we also have to be discerning. It's not just about naming names, like dragging them all out, arresting them, but this is also about facing a shadow within humanity. So, how do these shadows within humanity show up? Like power, sex, how does evil operate? And how does Epstein's network just represent something deeper than just criminal behavior? Like what is happening on a spiritual level? What is coming through these people who are doing this? We're also going to discuss the upcoming Saturn-Neptune conjunction and this threshold moment we find ourselves in. When we release this podcast, you might notice yourself at a personal threshold. You might notice, oh, wow, the world seems to be at a threshold. There's going to be certain illusions that they're going to end. There's going to be old cycles which finally tie up. And a new reality, which maybe you can't quite see yet, is being seeded. We're also going to talk about how, disillusionment, grief, loss of faith are actually part of waking up, and we can anchor a deeper sense of really realistic faith forged through facing these dark realities. We're also going to discuss, what this moment asks of us, how we can work with these energies. And then if you're new to our podcast, we always do a part 2. So you can go to veilofreality.com/membership and you get access to all the second hours of all of our podcasts. I think we're at like over 160 hours of over 160 podcasts. So if you would like to listen to part 2, you can join and be a member to get access to all of that. And in this part 2, we're going to go beyond just this purely 3D perspective and really go deeper into the occult aspects of this. How is it related to spiritual warfare? How do certain Asuric and demonic forces operate through humans? What are the mechanics of this kind of trauma-based mind control, which got very clearly outlined in the emails? I thought that was a really interesting part. And, why is just arresting or even like killing these evil people? How is that never going to change anything from a spiritual perspective? We're also going to examine the connection between Epstein's network and his huge investments in both transhumanist technologies, AI, and reveal that these are kind of connected to the same predatory consciousness that we outlined before, but rather it's attacking soul consciousness in this instance. We're also going to look at things from a higher perspective. So, beyond these labels of good and evil, how can we find real solutions on a spiritual level? How can we navigate these difficult changes that are happening? How can we become seeds for the new cycle instead of just, freaking out at all the things that are collapsing? And, what is your specific role over the coming years? How can you find your own specific purpose? Because one thing I think that is really important, I think many people have said, we've said many times, is you didn't come here without a reason. You decided to incarnate on this specific period in human history. We've been through these collapse cycles. We've been through these fourth turnings before. The last time was around World War II. And we're just going to experience another massive change, and how, I feel like how you relate to change will make it easier or harder on yourself, because all the external chaos, it's designed to keep you reactive, drained, falling into these various divide and conquer narratives, always waiting for the next big piece of news to drop, rather than finding out, why am I here? How can I channel my energy wisely? And it also, it can be very negatively orientated. The more that you're just consuming information, based on clickbait and fear, you can just fall into doom and gloom. And yes, it's going to be rocky. Yes, there's going to be a lot of darkness being revealed. But the Saturn-Neptune conjunction just wants us to face reality without dissociating into denial or fantasies or wishful thinking. And most of all, chaos births change. So it creates friction, which also acts as an alchemical fire to transform things. And we're really forging the seeds for the next cycle right now. So an era is ending. The systems that belong to that era will need to collapse, and the truth will be revealed, at least to those who are willing to see it. But what happens next is not predestined. It really depends on what we choose to see as human beings in this moment in history, this transitional moment. It's not just through fighting external enemies. It's not just through posting on social media, through activism, exposing everything. But, how can we use this moment for inner transformation? And how can we come in alignment with what actually wants to emerge through us as unique channels for the divine? So it's important to really remember this time is not hopeless. It's an opportunity to consciously become part of what seeds the next cycle of the next 100 years. And the more comfortable you are riding the waves of change, letting go of riding the waves of chaos, the easier this birth passage will be.
All right. So before we dive deep into this topic and all the topics Laura just mentioned, a quick announcement. We still have some spots left for our upcoming in-depth group coaching program, Time of Transition Embodied Soul Awakening. We have done this program already 16 times over the past 5-6 years. We took a break last year and now come back with an updated version, even more material, more expanded, and even an additional 6-month integration phase to keep the community going, because it's important in this day and age. We realized to be not only connected around so-called like-minded people, but people engaged in the same work and supporting each other. So the next round starts March 18th until June 21st, until the summer solstice. So basically spring equinox to summer solstice. We're about 80% full right now, so it's almost full, but there's still some spots left. You can learn more about it at the website thattimeoftransition.com, and it will be also linked in the show notes, and you learn more about it. All the enrollment options, all the content, everything we're doing is on that page, and it's by application only. So once again, go to thattimeoftransition.com for our Embodied Soul Awakening program. All right, so let's start, before we go deeper into Epstein and the occult and all the craziness and everything that's happening on that level. Let's start with the foundational material level, because on the financial level, the markets have been extremely volatile. There's a lot going on, and I don't want to go too deep into the economics itself, or, we've seen gold, silver rise up to all-time highs only to crash again. Same with crypto and Bitcoin crashing, dollars losing value. The whole financial system is going through its own transformation, so to speak. But ultimately, this market volatility in the financial crisis, so to speak, is also a mirror of psychological instability. At a deeper level, it really exposes the fear of physical survival, the fear of losing safety, control, or, certainty. People scramble from one external anchor to another, hoping something outside themselves will provide some sort of security. And from a spiritual perspective, this is one of the core lessons of our time, I feel, because anything that is purely external will eventually fail you, right? To externalize everything, to have everything, your whole security depending on an asset, for example, right? Be it markets, money, assets, or even institutions. But when fear of survival dominates consciousness, people become extremely reactive, impulsive, and easy to manipulate. And we see this in the market itself. So to be very clear, this does not mean ignoring practical reality or pretending money doesn't matter, right? It's not about spiritually bypassing the topic of money, finances, abundance, and prosperity, or painting money as evil, which is very common, right, in spiritual circles. In fact, many spiritually minded people, for them, a major lesson is learning to be grounded in physical reality and to develop a healthy relationship with the material world and their finances. Like everything else, the financial and also the monetary system is going through its own process of evolution and death and rebirth process at the end of this fourth turning and even the Kali Yuga. So everything is changing, transforming itself. Nothing is excluded from the shift, right? That's why I always say there's no safe space in any parts of the world, because something way bigger is happening. Which also means that our entire ideas or beliefs in relationship to wealth and abundance is being challenged to evolve. Again, this doesn't mean to demonize money or wealth. A lot of wealthy people deal with a lot of projections, but rather learning how to reclaim the money force from the hostile influences, from the corruption and all of this, from the greed. And as Sri Aurobindo put, he said, quote, "Money represents a great power of life which must be conquered for divine uses. Therefore, you must have no attachment to it, but also no disgust or horror of it." So the ultimate security comes really from this inner alignment and ground connection to something deeper within us. That's why we do the work we do, right? The great work. So in this context, this conversation also then goes way beyond market analysis or trying to predict the next trending asset, right? And all the market analysts out there. Because we are being asked of something deeper from us. In the sense that spiritual task is not, again, to reject money or be enslaved by it, but consciously reclaim and purify our relationship. Right? In the end, money is to serve a higher aims, true spiritual growth, the evolution of consciousness in alignment with our Dharma. And we all have our specific Dharma. And again, this doesn't mean renouncing material comfort, giving everything away, or denying yourself the enjoyment of life, but questioning where your desires come from. Most people have really socially, culturally conditioned desires, trauma responses, and none of it is alignment with their deeper purpose or deeper Dharma here. And true abundance arises truly when money serves the divine, which is aligned with our inner Dharma, with our purpose, and not just the wounded ego with its socially conditioned desires. But the more we identified with physical survival alone, the more chaotic these transitions feel, the more fear and anxiety, right? Which only works for these forces that are kind of manipulating humanity from unseen realms. But the more rooted we are in our true self, with capital S rather than fear, the less we are thrown around by the very external shocks that are already happening. But this is a whole big topic on its own. You can also explore it more and read more about it in my article called Reclaiming Your Birthright to Abundance, Breaking Free from Scarcity Programming. You find it on my website, veilofreality.com. So with that being said, let's move into the big news over the past week, the Epstein files, right? Humanity's darkest shadow exposed on some level. And just to recap again what Laura just mentioned, I think it was on January 30th, more than 3 million pages of the Epstein files were released. And out of over 6 million pages identified as potentially relevant, so to speak. So this includes over 2,000 videos, 180,000 images. We have been waiting for this for years, for a long time, right? It followed the Epstein Files Transparency Act in November that was signed into law. So those are the politics mechanics behind this release. And it's definitely the most detailed look yet into Epstein's operations, finances, and network, and all of that going back to the early mid-2000s. Now, obviously, we were waiting for people to be exposed, to be arrested, and all of that. And obviously, I've been researching pedophile elite rings even way before Epstein in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's a very, very dark rabbit hole. And I can tell you right away, obviously what we've seen in the Epstein files is nothing of what is really occurring. This should be clear for anybody somewhat familiar with this topic, but there's still some interesting discoveries, I would say, right? Because a wide range of powerful and influential figures appear in the documents, names from politics, tech, finance, media, even spirituality and royalty are being mentioned, right? Some I mentioned just in passing, others are repeatedly in emails, travel records, photos, and so forth. So give a little short list of some of the names that are implicated. Number one, Bill Gates, we've known that already, allegedly got an STD from a hooker and then tried to secretly drug his wife with antibiotics so she wouldn't know. There's an exchange between him and Jeffrey Epstein. There's also the Epstein files reveal that Bill Gates was planning a pandemic simulation with Jeffrey Epstein in 2017, interestingly. So, plandemic, the planned pandemic, not so much conspiracy anymore. Or conspiracy theory anymore, rather than more factual now. Obviously, Bill Clinton is in it. All kinds of photos and emails released. He flew to Epstein's island on his plane 16 times between 2001 and 2004. There's also an email exchange with Elon Musk and Epstein and discussing visiting Epstein's private island, but Musk has said he repeatedly refused the Epstein invitation, so good for him. Richard Branson, he is the founder of Virgin Group, Virgin Airlines, was inviting Epstein to his private island in an email and said, quote, "Bring your harem." And another one who's implicated, very interesting, Trump's current Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, recently visited Epstein's island, only just a few years ago, like I think 2017 or something like that. Could be wrong about that, but definitely after Epstein was already convicted. which contradicts Lutnick's prior statements claiming he cut ties a decade ago. So he's been lying there. Prince Andrew, we already knew that. Hundreds of mentions with photos released, including one showing him in all fours with an unidentified woman. And very interesting one, I was not too aware of his work or his presence, but I've seen him here and there. He's a longevity influencer, Dr. Peter Attia. He's mentioned over 1,000 times, right? And in one of the emails to Jeffrey Epstein, he wrote, quote, "The biggest problem with becoming friends with you, the life you lead is so outrageous and yet I can't tell a soul." And he's also talking about a quote unquote fresh shipment, which is, interesting. And also, surprise, surprise, but not for some, no surprise for me, mainstream spiritual teacher Deepak Chopra was mentioned thousands of times and wrote to Jeffrey Epstein, "Bring your girls, it will be fun to have you." And another one, "God is a construct, cute girls are real." So
hilarious.
It's kind of...
And by the way, I don't know if you've seen, there's been public... The people who have been addressed in the Epstein files have also made public declarations. Deepak, Peter Attia, the Dalai Lama. Did you see that one that I sent you the other day?
I have not seen that yet.
The
no.
Dalai Lama, apparently he was named in there and just came out saying, I don't know him, I've never met him, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So they've all come out with their excuses. And not one of them obviously is going to admit to any criminal stuff because they know what he was engaged in, so they don't want to implicate themselves. But it's just very interesting just watching all these people kind of come out and publicly declare. But I also have to say, with the Scorpio side of me, all the names that would really shake people up, I believe, were taken out or completely redacted. And then also all the really horrifying stuff. There's one email where Jeffrey Epstein emailed someone and said, I can do this for you, but not through email. So there was a lot of stuff that was handled even outside of the emails. So for me, it's just
of course, it's still surface, but still, for a lot of people, people thought it was just nonsense and nothing behind it. It's more almost for what we would call normies, regular people, to get a wake-up call a little bit, right? But you made a good point with these apologies. I wrote about this too, because it was very interesting how similar many of these public apologies and statements sounded from even Deepak Chopra or this longevity influencer, many others, right? They almost sound the same, very carefully worded. Obviously, some PR person or their lawyer.
Yeah.
As if they had no idea what's going on around them, very naive. And obviously, I really meant to believe that people operating at that level of power and influence would simply come out and say, "Yes, you got me. I had sex with prostitutes and minors.
Exactly.
Sorry about that. Oops, it happened."
Yeah.
That's why, again, you have to understand, question human nature, because many people on that level of power or driven by ambition and greed, who are drawn in power as well, who are drawn into these elite circles, most of them display very strong narcissistic or even sociopathic traits, right? So they're very skilled at presenting a fake public persona and hide behind a very carefully maintained, socially acceptable mask of sanity, so to speak, that can easily fool the average person. So obviously in such personalities, conscience is often absent and lying is part of their everyday life. Right? Again, that does not apply that everybody mentioned in files is implicated and context matters, but it's something to consider. It's also important to understand that not everyone named was automatically engaging in sexual deviant acts or even pedophilia. We have to be very clear about this. Many just had basic business dealings, some loose interactions, social connections.
Yeah, he was a very well-connected guy,
yeah,
too,
with
by
all
the way.
kinds of business dealings. So discernment is key, and we don't want to fall into the very popular guilt by association fallacy, right? So just because you're associated with somebody, you're guilty of a certain crime.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, we both have seen that this whole situation is even more complicated by the fact that all kinds of fake emails are now coming up. AI-generated images. A lot of people don't. Even General Flynn fell for one, right? Of all kinds of fake AI images of Epstein and other people circling around and fake emails. They just feed the sensationalism and false conspiracies. So I need to be very discerning about all of that as well. And then also, again, need to question our own projections, biases, emotional reaction, which most people don't do because most people are not engaged in inner work, have no self-awareness, so they easily project their own shadow and make assumptions and let their biases and projections get the best of them. So it's hard to really deal with this material very objectively and consider context. So that's just on a side note. But let's go beyond all of this surface level. And we know, as you rightly say, there's much darker stuff obviously happening. Most of that is not even available yet, or is definitely redacted. But even beyond these personas people, let's look into this shadow aspect, what you just talked about, the shadow of power, sex, and unconscious evil. Because someone asked an interesting question, or many people have asked this question, I noticed, from very regular people. And that was a very popular tweet, got a lot of replies. And she asked, can someone please explain to me why these super rich men are all pedos? You're a billionaire. Why can't you just date and have relationships with any gorgeous women who are 18 plus, right? But again, this has been going on for a long time, and most people really don't understand what power actually means in these higher circles. Again, not everybody, also want to be clear, is rich, influential, and billionaires automatically a psychopath or a pedo and all of that. We need to be very differentiating. But a lot of people are also not aware or have a true understanding how dark true evil can be. And one of the reasons is, even Carl Jung talked about this, and Mario Louis von Franz, is because when you never have faced your own shadow, your own potential for evil, you can be very genuinely shocked when you encounter that darkness in others and even deny it and defend them or get into cognitive dissonance because it's too disturbing to face. This is also why, and Carl Jung mentioned that too, why a lot of people who have not faced their own shadow are far more vulnerable to manipulation by evil forces that hide behind the mask of sanity, charm, and so-called niceness in human form. But what is being revealed through the Epstein files and elite pedophile rings, sex trafficking, and all of that goes far beyond sexual desires or sexual fetishes or just hooking up with, quote, gorgeous women or hot chicks. It even goes beyond attraction to children, especially when viewed through an esoteric or occult lens. Because at that level, you're dealing with some sort of azuric, psoriatic, or demonic forces, entities that are working through and possessing certain members of the powerful elite. These are individuals basically who function as empty vessels for forces most humans have no awareness of on that level. Again, we want to bring in the hyperdimensional spiritual context and other forces influencing and working through humans. And we've said this many times before, this is part of my work. Humanity is not on top of the food chain, consciousness speaking, frequency speaking. They are powerful, non-physical beings that feed on suffering, torture, and indulgence in the lower nature through the human puppets they work through. And obviously the sexual instinct and the sexual shadow in this dark age of the Kali Yuga is the easiest vector to manipulate, especially men for the most part. And the sexual shadow is the darkest shadow of humanity. Why? We can see it all around us. That's why nowadays OnlyFans models can make literally hundreds of millions of dollars per year, why porn sites are the most viewed websites in the world, why sex trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry, why the movie and music industry and our entire culture are hypersexualized, why women on social media tend to sexualize themselves through thirst posts, and why crude sexual humor is always popular, and ultimately why sex always sells, especially in advertising. And it's also why people who present themselves as morally superior or religious pure, right, while obsessively judging others as sinful, often carry deepest repressed sexual shadow. But this shadow seeks expression in secret, right? In powerful people, then they contact Epstein or in other cases, compulsive porn use, abusive behavior, overs. All the while, the public mask of being righteous, moral, and pure remains in place. So that's really how it works. So people also obviously generally feed on attention through sexual attractiveness, and others are mechanically drawn to whatever appeals to their lower nature. This is just the way it is in the present state of consciousness of humanity. But through this dynamic, on unseen levels, on occult levels, all kinds of non-physical forces that people are unaware of feed through as well, sometimes even installing sexual desires that are not truly their own. And again, the entry point is always the same: the unconscious shadow, unconscious trauma, and the lower nature and so forth, as within, so without. A topic we'll touch upon in the second hour deeper is also that people under the illusion that just by arresting the elite pedophiles or even killing everything will change. It won't. Far from it. So we'll go more into that deeper esoteric occult understanding on that topic in the second hour, because it's merely like cutting a branch off a tree, which roots remain intact, right? The branch will always grow back and often stronger than before, just as the shadow becomes darker, more powerful, and even more perverse the more it is denied, repressed, or projected on the other, right? Instead of faced and integrated. In other words, what does it come down to? Once again, shadow work is the name of the game, and it starts with each one of us.
Yeah, it's very fascinating because the Epstein files being released around the moment of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which represents removing illusions, especially about what happens in these powerful circles in this instance. And the fact that it happened around this conjunction symbolizes that the release of these files is critical for the shift we are experiencing collectively. What is also fascinating is this, as a Saturn-Neptune conjunction nears exact in 12 days from now, as of when I'm recording this, there are currently 3 people in the headlines who have this conjunction natally. I just happened across this because as an astrologer, I always Google people's birthdays. For anyone who does astrology, you do this, where you just something happens in the news and you always look at their birthdays. So I looked at Epstein's. He has Saturn-Neptune conjunction natally. And then the 2 ICE protesters, Alex Preddy and Nicole Good, both were born during this last conjunction.
They got killed by the ICE
Exactly.
agents.
The ICE protesters in Minneapolis. So Epstein, Alex Preddy, Nicole Good, they all have the conjunction in their natal chart. So to me, this shows that these people and what they represent is a symbol for these collective changes in energy. The important thing is that we have to understand the symbol is an archetype. We're meant to relate to it consciously without being possessed by it. So when we can relate to what these symbols mean with awareness, it can inform us, it can guide us, it can help us. But when we're unaware, it will possess us. And that's what we're going to unfortunately see on a consensus level is obviously Alex Preddy and Nicole Good, they're martyr symbols, and they're going to possess a lot of people and probably lead to some degree of conflict in the US as we're already experiencing. But I'm not going to get into this kind of pro-ICE, anti-ICE conversation right now. I think it's really important, especially with Pluto and Aquarius, we need to learn how to look at things objectively without disassociating either. We don't want to fall into tribalism, this whole left versus right narrative. I'm just so tired of it at this point. But we just need to understand that Epstein, these ICE protesters, have now become a symbol of these times. And these symbols will mean different things to different people depending on their own individual makeup, depending on what's in their own psyche. But I think what we need to be mindful of is that these symbols also lead to possession if we aren't careful, if we let them overtake us, if we don't know ourselves. So the question is how can we relate to what's happening without being possessed by it? And it's just very interesting because the Saturn and Neptune conjunction, it's honestly been pretty harsh for a lot of people who I've seen getting really hit personally. It's really a threshold moment. It's a moment where something will have to happen for things to never be the same. Something that's hidden could come to light, and all of this is happening so that a new cycle, hopefully seated on truth, can begin. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to reach exact on February 20th. So, we're really in the thick of it right now where big things will tend to happen. And just as Neptune has just recently entered Aries, the outer planets will all lock into their new signs for the long term. So Uranus also just went direct, by the way, as it wraps up its last pass in the final degrees of Taurus, which is why the financial markets are also going crazy. And it will enter Gemini for good on July 7th. So these are not minor transits. We are really at a huge turning point in collective evolution. And all of these planetary alignments signals that we are going to permanently differently, shift into a new era. And there's really massive forces at play astrologically, celestially, archetypally. And I'm not just talking about politically, I'm not just talking about the culture wars. I'm talking about there's a turning happening, a great turning, a death of an old world that will precede the birth of a new cycle. So over the next coming weeks, things are going to continue to intensify. There's going to be these historical collective moments. Many people, especially those who are strongly being impacted by this transit, are having experienced intense moments in their personal life as well. They're going through major turning points, long karmic cycles are ending. There's a lot of grief and loss and complete restructuring of reality for many people going on. So it's not a pretty transit, but it serves a purpose. And the purpose is some sort of brand new beginning. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction is happening at the 0 degrees point in Aries, which is like really the beginning of the whole astrological cycle too. And so that's why we're going to see major endings. It's really cannot be understated the gravity of what's happening right now on a collective and personal level for many people. So the shifts that are happening are very big. They're permanent and they are ending something huge. And most importantly, they represent what will need to end or collapse in our lives collectively before we can begin anew. So there's a huge theme with Saturn-Neptune about disillusionment. So on a psychological and spiritual level, Saturn-Neptune tends to bring really moments of loss of faith or moments of extreme disillusionment, but also the possibility that you can deepen your experience of faith and spirituality through that same suffering. So it's really about being spiritually mature by facing reality rather than getting caught up in fantasies. I know the world feels very heavy right now for a lot of people because they are being forced to face something pretty harsh, sometimes even tragic. But this disillusionment is really part of waking up. It's about tearing the veil from your eyes and really confronting you with reality and mortality and endings. These are things we tend to not like thinking about, but they're part of the cycle of life. And, it is really a collective dark night of the soul moment where, it's really these moments where we feel the most alienated or most disconnected from God that are really the moments where we're on the edge of a major spiritual breakthrough. So the dark night of the soul tends to precede this moment of revelation. And there can be no rebirth without annihilating things that you believed in, maybe who you thought you were. We talk about rebirth, but we don't realize that this necessitates something ending, something being destroyed. And Saturn-Neptune was not going to let us go through that rebirth through denial, through escapism, through spiritual bypassing. It's really like, deal with this, you have to, and that's it. And historically, that last Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Capricorn, this is when the Berlin Wall fell. We also saw mass media through television. It began to spread rapidly. So again, we have this era of media expanding during this cycle. And this time with this Aries energy, it has this kind of wartime energy where people are really kind of becoming more confrontational and willing to speak up for what they believe in. And there's a lot of battles going on. And then with Pluto and Aquarius aspecting it, we also see this aspect of rebellion, against those existing structures, those collapsing systems. At the same time, similar to this mass media through television happening in 1989, our media online is being overtaken by these AI generated realities and fake videos. And, it's really hard to know what's real anymore. And if you believe everything you see on the internet, I recommend that you start being extremely discerning, because I would argue that 80% of it is like distorted or clickbait in some way. That's at least what I'm seeing. You know, we have this fake news, fake videos. We even have fake Epstein emails coming out, which is not to be surprised. You know, everyone's operating on this clickbait too, like, oh, this is going to happen, but they won't tell you exactly what. So we really have to become more discerning as we enter this new reality. You know, the Saturn-Neptune square, which is another aspect of this cycle, we saw the Truman Show and the Matrix being released. So both are reflections of this archetypal theme that things are not exactly as they seem. And the only way to see things clearly is to, in Aldous Huxley's words, cleanse the doors of perception. So we need to see it through the eyes of a higher level of consciousness. So, you know, Neptune is really about dissolving illusions, fantasies, you know, false selves, while Saturn forces a reality check. It forces us to take responsibility. It makes us face the consequences of our actions. So together, they're stripping away a lot of what is unreal in our lives. And, you know, who are you when the fog clears? Why, you know, so many people feel disorientated right now because that's kind of the nature of anything when Neptune is involved. So what, you know, if you are getting out of a relationship or something big is ending, you know, there might be questions is like, who am I now that this has ended? You know, who am I when what used to provide me meaning in life or a sense of identity is no longer here? So this disillusionment, this withdrawing energy from certain paths, this realignment on a different path is all part of the process. And, you know, this Aries energy is really not a passive energy. It's not about just like this kind of Piscean energy of like, we're all one and unity. This is really a lot more confrontational and almost like an existential threat to our identities, where it's like, who are you when these structures around you collapse? Who are you when you can't trust anyone outside of you to tell you what to believe, you know, what to do? You know, we really need to look at where we're handing our authority over to the outside world, you know, whether it was a system, an ideology, or a certain narrative. You know, all of these can start to no longer feel appealing as we kind of go through this existential crisis where we have to learn how to withdraw from a little bit of the craziness of the world and really find our own inner authority and center again. Because everything I feel happening in the world mirrors some deeper psychic themes that we're dealing with. So the financial volatility is the survival fears, you know, representing the end of Uranus and Taurus. The Epstein files mirror this collective sexual power shadow and positions of power. And then we see this kind of acceleration of AI and transhumanism trying to almost get us even more disconnected from ourselves and just kind of escape into this digitized, soulless reality. So, you know, Saturn-Neptune is really going to give us this message that we can't avoid reality anymore. You are starting a new cycle, but you have to also be willing to be a new person, whether you're ready or not. So, you know, this transit may really ask you to ask yourself deeper questions like, what is ending and what do I need to take action on, you know, and how can I take action in the areas of my life that are challenging right now? And you might be forced to. The thing that I kind of like about Saturn transits is it tends to show up with a very material event. This is not just like a psychological or spiritual experience for many people, although there's obviously aspects to that to every transit, but there will be something physically that happens in your life, like some major change that will force you to take action, to be more independent, to be more courageous, to be your own person, to maybe discover who you really are. So we're kind of ending this Neptune and Pisces cycle of this kind of spiritual escapism and disassociation from ourselves and just not being grounded in reality. It's not just about like singing Kumbaya and praying and just, you know, doing another ayahuasca ceremony. It's really going to force us to take action, to be mature in some sort of way, you know, and stop our life force leaking through these Piscean, methods of escape or distracting or getting caught up in all this social media. It's very interesting. We're seeing a shift away from social media too that's happening as a response to this technological revolution. So, there will be areas of life where we need to grow up and take responsibility and make difficult choices. And with Aries, this is about our will, our identity. We're going to have to experience a reset of our identity, as crazy as that sounds, So that's why many people will feel lost, because their old self will no longer work. And at the same time, the new person they're becoming is like just an infant, just like maybe even in the womb still. So we're really at that in-between space, this kind of threshold of a whole new life, a whole new version of you. I recommend taking advantage of it, because this conjunction will mark the end of a long karmic cycle and the seeding of a new one. But in order for that cycle to begin, something old has to dissolve before something new can take form. So I think when a lot of us look back on this moment, regardless of what happens in the world, we're going to see this is a moment where the new cycle started to begin, just the very beginning seeds, but something had to end or collapse first.
Excellent. That was a great overview. I'm really fascinated always how astrology mirrors everything what we're going through and can help us guide us through it. So this ends the first hour. Again, if you are interested to dive deeper into this work with us personally, we still have some spots left in our upcoming 14-week group coaching program, Embodied Soul Awakening, and check that out at the website thattimeoftransition.com. Everything is there, and it's by application only. So for part 2, for members, again, if you're not a member yet, for the podcast episodes, second hour podcast episodes, you can sign up on my website, veilofreality.com/membership. In part 2, we're going to dive deeper into the occult psychology and hyperdimensional non-physical forces acting on humanity right now, because they're very active, especially in this darkest age of this Kali Yuga right now. So we will be talking about the Azuric and demonic forces operating through the human vessels, the occult mechanics of trauma and exploitation. And again, we'll explore why simply just arresting or killing evil people or the pedos will not change anything. We'll also examine the connection between Epstein's network and his heavy investment in AI and transhumanism technologies, all interrelated and all expressions of the same predatory consciousness that's kind of attacking the soul, so to speak, just from different angles. But we'll also look at the higher perspective, even beyond good versus evil, and what the real solution entails in this time of transition, how to navigate these difficult changes in life, and how to truly become the seeds for the next cycle, because that's the key point. It's not about trying to save what is meant to perish, so to speak. And obviously we explore why embodiment is imperative, especially now. And ultimately what your specific role is over the coming years. That's pointing also to your Dharma. And that will be in the second hour. Thank you for listening, and we'll be right back.